Ghostwire Tokyo is Tango Gameworks' latest game since their work on the Evil Within duology. I had never checked out the Evil Within, and to be honest, I was a bit hesitant to buy Ghostwire Tokyo after the reviews from major media outlets started to surface, but every time I saw the game in action, I felt compelled to play it. So reviews be damned, I ponied up the $70 and oh boy am I glad that I did. The story and characters are serviceable, but the environmental storytelling and nods to Japanese culture and spiritualism are where this game excels. The gameplay is more fun than I had anticipated despite some weird traversal hiccups. Performance isn't Ghostwire Tokyo's strong suit, but the visuals are staggering. The sound design is haunting, and the almost lack of a soundtrack suits the unsettling emptiness in Tango Gameworks' depiction of Shibuya. I don't want to spoil the entire review, so stock up on arrows and snacks. We have some paranormal activity to investigate. A spiritual terrorist named Hanya has separated the souls of Shibuya civilians from their bodies. A lone survivor, Akito, who nearly died in a motorcycle accident while on the way to a hospital to visit his sister, Mari, is possessed by a paranormal investigator named KK. With Akito's body and KK's supernatural powers, they fight the visitors that have taken over the city to stop Hanya's reign of terror and rescue Mari. Despite Akito and KK having a contemptuous relationship at first, they begin to understand one another and their similarities begin to show over time. While roaming the vacant city of Shibuya, discovering files provides insight into the city's civilians and their culture. Voice logs from Ed, KK's man in the chair, provide more understanding of the paranormal technology being used, the spiritual beings roaming Tokyo, and the machinations of the visitors. Finding dossiers from KK's previous investigations tell short stories and detail the paranormal happenings going on under everyone's noses. On the surface, the side quests are simple, but they're surprisingly deep if you're paying attention. I found them to provide interesting perspectives on topics like landlords taking advantage of elderly tenants, fame-chasing content creators ignorantly dabbling in things they don't understand, and a cursed office building where several suicides had taken place. A supplementary aspect of the game's world building is its inclusion of vertical slices of Japanese culture. Relics found throughout the world have descriptions in the menu that explains their history, plus their real-world and spiritual implications. Additionally, descriptions of consumables detail popular snacks and their cultural relevance as well. These finer details provide a glimpse into life in Tokyo and help make the abandoned city feel real and lived in. While I think that the story can be a little convoluted, I enjoyed it quite a bit. It felt like watching an anime without the anime aesthetic, which was super appealing to me. Once I got past the suspension of disbelief, I found a story that explored greed, guilt, vengeance, and a plethora of emotions through the lens of Japanese cultural spiritualism. I found that to be well executed and unique in terms of the games I've played personally. Similarly, Ghostwire Tokyo also features some truly unique gameplay mechanics. However, Tango Gameworks doesn't reinvent open world game design, but maybe that's not such a bad thing. Let's dive into gameplay. Ghostwire Tokyo is an open-world first-person shooter, but instead of toting guns, you sling elemental spells at your ghostly foes while completing missions, traversing Shibuya, and collecting myriad items and relics. In terms of Ghostwire Tokyo's open-world design, it's about as boilerplate as one might expect. There are main missions and side missions, as well as a number of tasks and requests to complete. The player navigates to the location where they can begin a mission that they'll either complete in the open world, inside a haunted building, or somewhere in between Earth and the afterlife. Sprinkled throughout the world are Jizo statues that reward the player with upgrades to their ethereal weaving abilities. Additionally, Tanuki are disguising themselves around the city as everyday objects. Finding them will grant the player a reward. Torii gates around Shibuya must be cleansed to eliminate the fog, preventing you from accessing all areas of the map. Narratively, the fog is separating Shibuya from the rest of the world, which I suppose is a clever way to include the fog of war mechanics so many open world games feature. The map can be a bit clouded with icons at first, but once I realized I could filter out completed missions, it became a lot easier to read. The combat in Ghostwire Tokyo is the true standout to me. Ethereal weaving is at the forefront of attacks, allowing the player to cast wind, water, and fire attacks. When an enemy visitor approaches, landing shots with ethereal weaving will expose the enemy's core. To remove the core, you can either tether it and yank it out from a distance, as well as remove it with a hand seal, or just straight up rip it out with your bare hands. For those that wish to take a more stealthy approach, Akito has a bow and arrows at his disposal, in addition to the handful of talismans that can be used to stun, distract, evade, and even expose the core of enemies. Traversing Shibuya in Ghostwire Tokyo is maybe the worst aspect of the game. While walking the streets, you'll hardly notice any issues, but as soon as you start scaling buildings is when you'll begin noticing chips in the paint. I often clipped through ledges and simply teleported to the top of the roof instead of the climbing animation playing out. There are yokai gliding above rooftops called Tengu that allow you to grapple to the tops of buildings, and thank goodness for them. Eventually, I unlocked the ability to summon a Tengu wherever I needed one, and it aided in traversal tremendously. The verticality in the game also highlights some of the most glaring performance issues, but we'll get to that later. Ghostwire Tokyo is a straight-up collectathon. There are wandering spirits all around the city that need to be collected with katashiro, a doll-like object made of paper that's been employed in Japan since ancient times. Once collected, the player uses payphones to wire these ghosts to Ed on the other side of the fog, hence the name Ghostwire, I assume. There are also yokai all around Shibuya that hold magatama. Magatama are sources of power that are used to access certain upgrades in the skill trees. Obtaining magatama from yokai is done by either tricking the yokai, following them until they get tired, or aiding them in one way or another. The 3 skill trees are abilities, ethereal weaving, and equipment. Abilities allow you to upgrade certain traversal and combat abilities like glide, core grab, and spectral vision. The latter allows you to see spectral energy through walls and also provides guidance to your objective, similar to Dead Space. Ethereal weaving upgrades reduce the time to charge attacks or increase the fire rate, the spread, or the piercing abilities of your ethereal attacks. Equipment grants the opportunity to increase the carrying capacity of talisman, arrows, consumables, and the number of prayer beads that can be worn. In addition to prayer beads, which buff particular abilities like attack power and HP recovered from consumables, you can also acquire different outfits, but they're simply cosmetic. I've mentioned consumables a number of times and it probably goes without saying, but they are how you restore Akito's health. There are also some core grabbing techniques that restore fractions of health, but they are supplementary techniques. Traversal aside, the most frustrating sections of the game are when Akito and KK are separated. Without KK, Akito is unable to use KK's supernatural abilities. Oddly enough, he can still core grab, but ethereal weaving is off the table, so you're forced to sneak around with the bow. Thankfully, these sections aren't very long, but it's essentially a no mud, no lotus kind of moment. You can't appreciate the flower if not for the rain. The flower being the fun of ethereal weaving, and the rain being the bummer of having those abilities taken away. I'm of the mind that a game should promote fun, not restrict it, but that's subjective, I suppose. Ultimately, Ghostwire Tokyo is a lot of fun to play. The combat can get intense, and running around the city collecting different relics and items is a joy, if not a little tedious at times. I completed all the side quests, but did not feel compelled to collect the 240,000 wandering spirits floating around Shibuya, nor every collectible that was on offer. However, after completing the game, you can go back and round up everything else, which is always nice. But I would be remiss if I didn't highlight the beautiful visuals and unfortunate performance issues, so let's take a closer look. I've never been to Japan, so I won't pretend to know what Tokyo looks like, but what I can tell you is that Ghostwire Tokyo is beautifully crafted. Everything from the lighting to the character designs and the ethereal weaving is alluring. This abandoned depiction of Shibuya is haunting, and the more linear missions allow for some of the most nightmarish visuals I've seen in a long time. I wouldn't call Ghostwire Tokyo a scary game, but it's definitely unnerving and creepy. Walking through an empty hospital with ghosts playing tricks on you is about as scary as it gets, but I think Tango Gameworks knocked that aspect out of the park. Ghostwire Tokyo isn't prohibitively scary. It uses its creepy visuals to evoke an uneasy feeling, and I think that's really special. I will add that I only noted one jump scare throughout my entire playthrough, and it was so tastefully done that I couldn't even be mad at it. Where things do get more troubling is in the performance department. I noted earlier that the verticality of the game's traversal highlights its most glaring issue, and that is the inconsistent frame rate. I'm no Digital Foundry, so I can't tell you how bad it actually is, but I noticed considerable frame rate dips throughout my entire playthrough. Before I unlock the ability to summon Tengu wherever to grapple to the tops of buildings, I'd have to take the stairs. While winding up the stairs, the higher I went, the lower the frame rate went. Just standing at the top of a building and panning across the skyline showcases this perfectly. It's really a shame because, for a lot of people, consistent frame rates are a core tenet of game design. I think I tend to agree with that, but if a game is fun at its core, I can overlook it. With Ghostwire Tokyo, I think its frame rate issues get a pass. I don't want to compare the two necessarily, but similarly to Elden Ring, the game is good enough to get a pass. Ultimately, it's not game-breaking, just unfortunate. Break out your tinfoil hats because I have a quick conspiracy theory for you. Since Tango Gameworks is a Bethesda studio, which is now owned by Microsoft and was only released on PlayStation due to a contractual obligation, I would bet the house that when Ghostwire Tokyo inevitably comes to Xbox, the frame rate is locked at 60 frames per second and doesn't budge. But what do I know? Tango Gameworks accompanied Ghostwire Tokyo's desolate and creepy visuals with equally vacant and bone-chilling audio, so lend me your ear for just a moment longer. The emptiness of the streets in Shibuya is complemented by an eerie silence while playing Ghostwire Tokyo. However, due to everyone in the city being separated from their bodies so suddenly, there's still music playing in nightclubs and convenience stores, so as you're exploring the city, you'll hear muffled music playing faintly in the distance. I hardly noticed a soundtrack in this game, except while watching cutscenes or in the midst of combat. However, I think it was a superb design decision. The silence elevates the emptiness of the city and is potentially more unsettling than some avant-garde echoes thrown in the mix. In terms of the sounds, Ethereal Weaving has some truly great sound design on display. The tightening pull of the tethers during a long-range core grab is so satisfying and complements what the adaptive triggers are doing on the DualSense controller. Additionally, the distortion that comes through the controller speaker when an enemy is nearby is a nice touch. However, the game does not feature the option to turn off the controller, which kind of stinks for anyone that's trying to play the game in the dead of night. The game defaults to a Japanese voice track with subtitles turned on, but there is an option to switch it to an English voice track, which I didn't find to be terrible as they often are. Shame me in the comments, but I did switch it to English for the entire playthrough. Partly because I find myself reading the subtitles instead of looking at what's happening, but mostly because subtitles can contain spoilers that might ruin gameplay capture that otherwise could be used in a video, so I always turn subtitles off when capturing video anyway. I did notice that by turning off subtitles, certain interactions with NPCs didn't have dialogue. For example, when I would read the thoughts of a dog that would lead me to an Oni, subtitles were present, but when I approached a Nekomata in a convenience store, no subtitles were displayed, which resulted in some seemingly incoherent comments from Akito and KK. But it wasn't that big a deal in the grand scheme of things. I looked at it like when Han Solo responds to Chewbacca, and that made it kind of endearing. Overall, I wouldn't be surprised if Ghostwire Tokyo wins Sound Design Awards during Game of the Year discussions. Tango Gameworks nailed the audio in this game and they deserve their roses for doing so. But with that, we can move on to my final thoughts, so let's wrap up. At the end of the day, I think Ghostwire Tokyo is a really good game. I think a lot of people are going to grab this game on sale after waiting due to the initial reviews and realize they were sleeping on a super fun and interesting game. Some may even wait until it eventually comes to Game Pass and then be blown away. Mark my words, people will champion this game in time. I think it does a lot well without doing anything truly amazing, except for its audio and sound design, which are phenomenal. But I don't say that to knock it necessarily. Despite its flaws, I had a great time, and throughout my playthrough, I kept bumping it up my list of Game of the Year contenders. Not even Horizon Forbidden West could get me to complete all the side missions, but I was so intrigued by the little stories I was being told in Ghostwire Tokyo that I went out of my way to play all of them, despite needing to get this review finished. Ghostwire Tokyo has its issues, but is a cut above average. Its gameplay is exciting and compelling, but is marred by poor traversal. Its story is serviceable, but is saved by Tango Gameworks' successful world building and environmental storytelling. Despite its performance issues, the game is stunning and nails the appropriate amount of creepiness without spilling into full-on horror, and the sound design is immaculate. You really have to hear it for yourself. For what it's worth, I think Ghostwire Tokyo is a 3.5 out of 5. You owe it to yourself to check it out whenever you can. If you can overlook a couple of hiccups along the way, I think you'll be pleasantly surprised by how awesome this game truly is. Have you played Ghostwire Tokyo? What do you think? If you haven't, do you think you'll check it out? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoy videos like this, subscribe to the channel. I do reviews, retrospectives, and other gaming related videos. I recently went to the Limited Run store's grand opening and got to interview Douglas Boggart. If that interests you, please go check it out. I also host and produce a weekly Nintendo-centric podcast, and the video component goes live on this channel every Monday at 5 AM Eastern Standard Time. If you would like to check out my writing, I write for lordsofgaming.net. If you're looking for a website comprised of game enthusiasts that simply love video games and want to write about them, look no further. Lords of Gaming is the site for you. Anyway, thank you so much for watching this video. It means the world to me. Lead with love and stay hydrated.